One of the easiest, most accurate and repeatable ways to get accurate circles in woodworking, such as a circle like this, is to use a router jig. Unfortunately, they are quite loud, they can be a little bit slow, and they can be very messy. And there are a lot of circumstances where they don't work. This sort of circle, no problem, but let's say it was 100mm thick, you're not going to find a router bit that's going to be able to handle that. In the case of something like this, which is a carving blank, I'm actually happy with close enough. This is very, very close to a perfect circle. There's just a little bit of a bump on one edge. And the way to make very repeatable, easy circles that are very close to perfect, but might just be a little bit off, is to use something like this, which is a circle cutting jig for the bandsaw. In this video, I'll go over how to make this jig and how to use it. Very little is needed in materials for this jig. You'll need a piece of some sort of sheet good, MDF, chipboard or plywood is fine, a length of hardwood for the runner, a short length of T-track, a star knob, a T-track bolt and a shelf pin. To start off with, cut the plywood down to size. Using the hardwood scrap, sneak up on a perfect fit for a miter track runner. Most miter tracks are 19mm, but there is always a little bit of variance. Cut it down, then do a test fit on the miter track, and make any micro adjustments at the table saw to get a good snug fit. My fit was just a little bit too snug on one end, but a hand plane took care of that little bit of variation. Once the width is correct, it can be cut down to thickness. It just needs to be less than the depth of your miter slot. About 8mm will do fine. Before attaching the miter bar, a dado needs to be cut for the T-track. Positioning the board up against the tensioned bandsaw blade will let me mark where the cutting edge of the teeth is on the board. The cutting edge of the teeth should line up with a pivot point, and so it should be in the middle of the slot for the T-track. The slot for the T-track is cut with a dado stack at the table saw, slowly sneaking up on the exact fit for a good sliding fit. Once a good fit is cut, an 8mm hole for the 5/16 inch T-track bolt can be drilled about 30mm in from the edge of the board through the slot cut for the T-track. The runner is glued onto the board, checking that it is roughly square with the edge. The distance isn't critical, I went with about 150mm, but more or less would be fine too. While the glue is still wet, I countersunk and screwed in screws to act as clamps. Once the glue is dried, it's time to add the saw kerf. Normally this sled is smoother, but I hadn't scraped all the glue from the runner properly. Saw about halfway through the dado. With the saw stopped, a small spacer can be glued on with super glue to act as a hard stop for the sled. This stop will bump into the bandsaw table and prevent pushing the sled further forward, which would mess up the alignment of the pivot pin. I used just an offcut of the miter runner. Speaking of the pivot pin, I found the easiest source of a small piece of metal is the pin from a shelf pin. Metric or imperial will work, just match the drill bit to what pin you choose. I found that pins with the clear plastic tend to be a little bit easier to extract for some reason. A pair of vice grips can pull them apart. On the back of your T-track, find the center point and drill through with a matching drill bit for the pivot pin. The T-track I used already has a center line extruded onto it. Make sure to deburr the drilled hole. Gently hammer the pin into the drilled hole. If the fit isn't particularly tight and wants to go all the way through, you can just use some CA glue on the inside of the track to hold it in position. Installing the T-track is easy. Drop the T-track bolt into the hole drilled earlier. Slide the T-track over the bolt head and tighten the knob on the bottom. To actually use the circle jig, drill a hole in the centre of your blank. I'm using a 5mm shelf pin, so a matching 5mm drill bit is used. Set the jig to the radius you desire, not the diameter. Place the blank onto the pivot pin. Turn the saw and slowly feed in the blank. Once you hit the stop on the sled, start rotating. Now that I've confirmed the sled works, it gets a quick sand. Followed by a few coats of polyurethane. This reduces friction, so it's easier to use the sled as well as easier to clean the dust off. This jig can handle up to about 1200mm diameter, 600mm radius, with let's see, about 300mm of T-track. I can do that by just reversing that. And we've got quite a large distance to the blade. I'm likely never to do that. If I am going for a 1200mm, it's probably going to be a tabletop, so I'm probably going to use the router so that I get the better quality surface finish. Likewise, this jig with this particular piece of T-track can go down to about 80mm radius, so 160mm diameter, which is probably the smallest I'm ever going to need to do on this type of jig. There's no real fixed dimensions for this. It's going to be dependent on your bandsaw, dependent on what sort of circles you're going to cut, but I do have a diagram of what this jig is on my saw, so if you've got something different, you'll just need to adjust a few values. The link to that is in the description, free download PDF type thing. Thanks for watching.